And what's what's interesting in this verse is that there are many different directions that the rabbis go in interpreting it. Right? So first of all, what's it actually like when the rabbis or when the Jews are at Sinai? I mean, we read about some of the special effects, but what's that moment like when the Jews are standing there and God is speaking?
Awesome.
Well, you would think there would be that component to it, right? There would be a certain amount of awe associated with that, right? And in fact, that is exactly what this first text says, Midrash Rabbah. Rabbi Abba, who said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, when the Holy Blessed One gave the Torah, no bird chirped, no fowl flew, no ox bellowed. The wheels of the divine chariot did not fly, nor did the seraphim chant, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. The sea was undisturbed, and no creature spoke. But the world was quiet, totally silent, and the voice came forth. Okay? And can you imagine one moment in the city of Houston where everything would be completely quiet? I mean, even in the middle of the night, Houston is never completely quiet. Right?
Okay.
But here it is. It's like we're having a moment of silence. And it's more than just a moment. It's a chapter. That's it. What do you imagine that moment would be like?
Defining.
Defining. So, it is the moment that, for many people, it defines Jewish unity, because there is this tradition that all of us were there at Sinai, all the Jewish souls, past and present and future.
Did you ever feel as if you remembered that?
No, I have a vague recollection, but not really.
Well, that's something.
Well, you asked the question for a reason, Andy. Did you ever feel like that?
Well, I imagined that I could remember feeling like that, but it was really based on what I read in the text.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that what was described there, it's a very articulate paragraph, I think. But part of what you would feel would be fear. I mean, that is so unlike any other experience. Silence is. Even in the natural world, as you said, there's always something going on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be scary. I'd be scared.
I would hate to be the one to break up that silence. I mean, Nick is thinking, oh, God's in the middle of the 10 Commandments and somebody, lets out this enormous fart.
Okay, I wasn't thinking that exactly.
No, but close, right?
Yeah. So, there's some Jew in the back going, hey, is this going to take a while? Or no?
Right. Like
what time's Kiddush?
Yeah. When is Kiddush anyway? Yeah. And who's sponsoring the Kiddush for 600,000 people, right?
I sure hope they don't have that tuna salad again.
Yeah. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Oy, boy.
Actually, like you're making television commercials or such that are silent, they put in a sound called white noise.
Yes.
I can't imagine not even having white noise.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, Eileen. It is just, there's always at least a humming,
That's
you
right.
know, the background noise of the universe. And to have none of that there, you kind of, you know, that there's a crazy saying, pain is telling you that you're still alive, you know,
Right.
or that you're not dead. Sound kind of tells you that you're not dead, you know, and here it is, you don't hear a word, you don't hear anything.
Yeah.
I would be scared.
It would be frightening, yes.
Welcome to Sinai. Please mute yourself. Yeah. Yeah, that would be something.
You know, it's interesting in the Midrash here that's we just read, the words at the, and this is a minor thing, I guess, the words at the very end, I am the Lord your God, there is a period. In other words, the who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, those two qualifiers, it's, you know, aren't there. And I think that's more in tune when I read it. And I read the Ten Commandments, there should be one that's just, you know, I am the Lord your God, period, paragraph,
Yes.
end of
Well,
story.
So, you know, there is a suggestion in the tradition, and I can't recall what the text is, that actually this is all they heard. Anochi Hashem Elohecha, I am the Lord your God. And then there's a further tradition that says, no, all that they heard was the first letter of the word Anochi. And the first letter, of course, is Aleph, which is
Doesn't have a
silent
sound.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me for just a moment. My dog is barking at a possum and I need to let him in. Not the possum, the dog.
Go carry on. Yeah. We have many different priorities we juggle in this class, Eileen. So just, you know, so you know. All right. So on to the next piece here. Here's Dale. So why were the 10 commandments not given at the beginning of the Torah? Reasonable question, right? I mean, if this stuff is so important, why isn't it right out there at the start? To what can this be compared? A king who entered another land, he said to them, I shall rule over you. He said, what have you done for us lately? You should rule over us. So what did he do? He built them a wall. He brought water to them. He fought wars for them. And then he said, I'll rule over you. And they readily agreed. Similarly, God brought forth Israel from Egypt, split the sea for them, sent down manna, sent out the quail, provided them the well for water, and fought for them the war against Amalek. So when he said, I'll rule over you, they said, got it. It's a credibility thing, I guess. Daniel, if you're speaking, you got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I was trying to be polite. It's hard. It's very hard for me to do that.
I know. Me too.
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, it's kind of like it sounds to me like being a benevolent dictator is okay. It's only when you're a bad dictator that they don't like you.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't particularly like this
God is a
paragraph.
benevolent dictator. However, people don't seem to do that very well. I mean, if you look in the last, let's say, century and a half, how many dictators do you know that were really benevolent?
It's funny you should say that because someone posted a sort of joke question on Facebook recently asking if you were a benevolent dictator of the world, what would you do? And that's exactly what I thought. There's no such thing. Or at least I can't name a single benevolent dictator.
Okay,
Yeah, Ronnie.
Ah, Ronnie.
okay. Yeah, we couldn't get in. We tried and tried and tried and tried, and Beth Yeshurun just didn't like us tonight. Okay, I'm not talking about
But you're-
benevolent, but I'm talking about a dictator that did a lot for the people and to this day is worshipped, and that is Fidel Castro. He brought literacy. There's no homelessness. There's no crime. Healthcare is all free. Education is all free. And yes, even though he was not a benevolent dictator and killed the opposition, he is still, if you go to Cuba, the signs are everywhere and people love him because of what he did.
Yeah.
did something else
I
good.
see Eileen screaming at you. Ronnie, the problem with that is if you go to Florida,
Yes,
you'll meet all the ex-Cubans.
correct. They were kicked out.
And
in
they will
1960.
tell you just the opposite. I mean, they'll tell you all the problems.
I
with
lived in South Florida when they started coming over, and they were
And?
rich, they were professionals, they left of their own will. Cuba is a mess. My friends have been there. It's falling apart. It's
Well, the
terrible.
infrastructure is
Absolutely
falling
wrong.
apart. The
It's
infrastructure,
absolutely wrong.
okay, well, the infrastructure is falling apart, and what's
Yes.
scary about it, because we were there,
Yes. Yes,
Russia
because
has,
Castro's keeping all the money. He took away all of the rich people's estates and he lived
True.
them and he entertained.
he did.
entertained. Yes, but those people worked for it. They were doctors and lawyers.
Yes, they were.
They worked for their money.
I'll tell you the scariest thing about going to Cuba, because we went on a humanitarian mission, is the Russians are slowly pulling out, and the Chinese are coming in.
Well,
They're
the Russians put up if you remember, dear, in the 60s, they put up things to come and bomb us over here. The Russians
They,
did
Right,
they
but-
tried.
with Castro.
right, but it scares me more that communist China is 90 miles away from us. That scares me more. But I'm
How
telling
far
you,
do you think Cuba is?
I said
No,
90
that's
miles.
what she's saying.
90, okay.
Yeah.
That's
But
what
what I'm
she said.
saying is, when you go there, there is no homelessness, there is no crime. Everyone gets a wonderful education. If you have a medical, whatever it is.
So when are you going to move there?
No, I'm not going
Okay,
to
I'm
move.
going to interrupt here because if you
Because my
keep it up,
cell
I'm just
phone
going to
did
leave.
not work.
This is not any fun to me whatsoever
Okay, guys.
to hear
Yes,
Eileen
Okay,
talk
let's
like
let's-
this.
I'm just saying,
let's
some
drop
dictators
Cuba.
do,
let's drop Cuba, okay?
yes, let's stop Cuba.
Let's drop it
Absolutely.
in the Atlantic and leave it there, all right?
Okay,
Moving right along to the next text, which I should have done a couple of minutes ago.
Sorry.
Why were the 10 Commandments not given at the beginning of the Torah? Right?
God
So-
hadn't done anything for us yet.
Yeah, so here's the God who is the one possible benevolent dictator. If you find that, then yeah, I'll go along with it. It's pretty hard for anybody else to deliver that in a good way, but God is God. So, God can do that. All right. Next text. It says, I am the Lord your God, Elohecha.
Personal.
If it were plural, it would be Elohechem. Right? Your in Elohecha is singular.
Addressed to every person.
Well, so that's one way to read it, right? So Midrash Hagadol says this is to convey that even if individuals violate them, the the commandments. It would be as if all of you had violated them. In other words, it speaks in the singular to suggest to you the gravity of what's being imposed on every individual. That if you break the commandments, it's not just like, okay, I'm checking out of the Jewish people. It's like you're a Sefer Torah with a letter missing. And if the letter is missing, then the Torah is not kosher. And the same thing for the Jewish people or the Jewish community. Yes, Ann.
Well, that implies that if we see somebody eating pork, we should try to gently and lovingly admonish them. And I don't want to do that.
You don't want to rip it away from them, Ann?
I don't want to tell other people what to do.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and there's, the rabbis talk about how to do rebuke. That's a topic for Parshat Kedoshim.
Yeah,
Because that's where
lovingly.
it says, "Hocheach tochiach et amitecha." You shall surely rebuke your fellow.
But
Right?
lovingly.
And one of the rabbis says, I would be surprised if anyone in our generation knew how to properly rebuke someone. Right? And so, yeah, there's a point beyond which it's really not a good idea to go out and tell everybody what to do. If I got into everybody's pots and pans, how would that work out? Maybe yours would be okay, Ann. I don't know, but
It wouldn't be an okay thing for you to do.
no, in general, it's not.
It's interesting that the Lubavitch Hasidim are probably the most successful proselytizing group in Judaism. They attract people a lot, and they do it with soft words and they don't tell you you've got to do anything. They invite you in, you feel part of it, you start developing some spirituality, and eventually you stop eating pork, and then you stop driving on Shabbat, and pretty soon you're from. No, I don't, and I don't mean that. I didn't mean that sarcastically.
I know you're not saying that pejoratively.
No, I mean that they don't come up and grip and tell you you're a bad Jew because you ate
That
bacon.
is part of the training of being a shaliach for Chabad, that you never do anything coercive. It's always framed in a positive way. And the Rebbe was very strong on that. Everything, mitzvot had to be done freely and positively without, any kind of, if you don't do this, there are going to be bad consequences. Like what? Like I didn't put on film that day. For somebody who never...
They can even take it pretty far, though. I've got to tell the story, and I'll try to keep it short.
Please.
I cannot have an aliyah at any of the Orthodox synagogues that I've ever been in, because my Beit Din 40 plus years ago had Reform rabbis.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else was kosher except for that. I went to Boston when my daughter was getting married, and I went to an Ufruf at a Hasidic Shabbat service morning. Okay. I was shocked when the rabbi called out my name to have an aliyah. I mean, with my Hebrew name, I was like, and he knew who I was. He knew what my background was. And for my, with my son-in-laws, Ufruf, I got an aliyah. And it was a very touching moment. And I have felt a lot less antagonistic towards Orthodox Judaism. This much.
Yeah.
Ever since.
Yeah, well, I mean...
And it was Chabadniks, is what Lubavitch Chabadniks that did that.
Yes. Chabad in general, because they strongly believe in outreach, they will do things that many Orthodox Jews of more liberal brands will not. Right? Eventually, Daniel, if you keep coming to my classes on Sunday, I'll be showing you some of the teachings of Chabad and how they believe that this is what's necessary in order to bring the Mashiach.
I've been going to your classes for 4 years. It would be really a psychological trauma if I stopped now, Rabbi.
Well, please don't get traumatized, okay? I want to make sure you don't have any trauma. So
I'll see
by
you
all
in
means,
48 hours.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes, please.
can we go back to the text? I have a question about something that I read.
Yes.
Okay. That if individuals violate them, it would be if all of you had violated them. That's a pretty high standard that cannot be achieved because there's always going to be someone that violates a commandment. So how do you achieve perfection? Maybe that's not the right word. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, perfection is not a thing of this world.
But there's always going
I
to be.
don't think that's what this is saying.
Okay,
This
please
is
explain it then.
saying as if. In other words, you as an individual should take your role as a member of the people as seriously as if your failure to do it would spoil the whole pattern for the
Okay.
entire people.
Okay, now I got it. I interpreted it differently.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Other comments, questions before we go on? All right then. Midrash lekach tov. Same question. What is it? Why does it have it in the singular? To convey, this is not so much different, to convey that every individual Jew must say, these mitzvot were given to me, and I personally must fulfill them. I must not say, it'll be okay if the Torah is maintained by others. You won't miss me so much. Yeah.
No Judaism by proxy.
No Judaism by proxy. Very good. Okay.
Let the rabbi do it.
And how often do we hear that?
Don't even begin to get me started on that subject.
Well, you have started actually, but it's okay. You've muted yourself again. All right. Just holding yourself down there, Daniel.
Biting my tongue.
Yes. All right. Next piece. Okay. So this comes from Rashi based on the Midrash. Why is it singular? This gives Moses something to use in Israel's defense when they made the golden calf. And when Moses said to God, let not your anger blaze forth against your people. You did not command them not to have other gods. You commanded it to me alone. Do I really buy that one? No, I'm afraid I don't.
You're going to have to translate that one for me. I don't follow what the point is.
So
Sorry.
Are you saying,
because it's set in the singular, Daniel, Moses is able to say to God, well, you said this to me. The people didn't think you said it to all of them.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Yeah.
Now, do I believe that? on a scale of 0 to 100, about 0.005. But there is this strand in Jewish thought that says, you know, the Jewish people, even when they sin, they're not as bad as they seem. Always, you know, judge other people favorably, especially other Jews, right?
That's in the
Well,
Pirkei Avot, isn't it?
yes.
Yeah, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. Dan et chavero lachaf zechut. Judge your fellow person favorably. And similarly, al tadin et chavercha shetagia mimkamo. Do not judge a person until you have stood in their place. Right?
And you never will.
Yeah, well, hopefully. So, you know, then, yeah. Yes, Del.
Isn't this one of the 2 commandments that God gave everybody, that the whole group at Sinai heard?
Well, yeah, except what Moses is saying here is that's not the way they heard it. They heard it as you talking to me because you put it in the singular. So this is like, you know, Moses trying to make the Jews look more innocent than they really are.
Like Rabbi Yitzhak,
Berdichev, yes. Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, the famous Hasidic Rebbe who always believed the best about other Jews. Right?
Okay.
Yes, Ronnie.
Okay, I'm going to show my ignorance here. It is my understanding that when Moses came down the first time carrying the 10 commandments and saw the golden calf, he smashed the 10 commandments and never communicated what Hashem had said to the people of Israel. It was my understanding when he came down the second time is when he related what Hashem had told him, the Torah. No,
Yes.
yes.
So this incident, when they made the golden calf, that's right after that. But the presumption is that the people did hear it, even though they didn't have the tablets yet. They heard God's voice at Sinai.
Okay.
saying what? The 10 Commandments?
Well, either that or some short version thereof, as Dell suggested. There's that strand in the tradition that says they didn't hear the whole thing. They just heard either the first 2 commandments or the opening
But it's
segment
some-
or just the olive.
But Rabbi, didn't Moses say it all for them since they couldn't hear
Yeah.
Hashem?
Well, it says God said these words.
Okay. Again, I'm
Yes.
confused. Okay. I thought at some point that Moses relayed to everyone who was around Mount Sinai the entire Torah. They made, I forget how many copies, one for each tribe and one for the Mishkan.
That's a
And that-
midrash.
Okay, it's a midrash. Okay.
That is not in the text of the Torah, as after all, the Torah is not finished until Moses dies. So there is no such thing as a scroll of the entire Torah because, you know, at Sinai, the Torah couldn't possibly have been finished.
No,
Okay.
but the 10 Commandments were. He
Right.
could have
So
told them all.
fine.
Okay, and going back to your question, why wasn't it first? Because you want to begin at the beginning, as some famous person said in the 30s. And the beginning is creation.
Oh, well, that's one answer. Right?
Rashi says something weird.
And that is which?
He says that he had to prove that the world belonged to Hashem and that he had a right to give Israel to us.
Yes, that is the very first comment of Rashi on the Torah, right? That it's the question of why does the Torah begin with the beginning? So rather than just say that the Torah has a message for all peoples, which at certain times may have been difficult for Jews to believe. Instead, it says, well, first we have to give a little bit of the history of the world and how the Jewish people came into being. And that's how we wind up at Sinai. Maybe. All right, moving on to the next piece. One
Can I
more
ask
answer to this.
Can I ask a quick question about
Yeah,
Rashi?
yeah,
there,
Dave.
Jim? This is a very, I'm going to use the word lenient. I don't know if that's right. It's a very forgiving kind of statement.
Absolutely.
Is that a characteristic of Rashi? Or is that the way he
Not
always acts?
necessarily. Not necessarily. But it is, he takes most of his material directly from the Midrash Rabbah. He may not have had some of the other Midrashim that we quote and that we have texts of today. And so it helped him to solve this problem. The other answers that are given to this that we've seen are more homiletical, right? I mean, it's a way of saying, it's a way of talking about personal responsibility, right? But Rashi may not have found that satisfactory. And he may not have seen these Midrashim. Midrash Shmot Rabbah, he knew.
I understand, and I can't even remember which one's which. Hillel and Shammai, one of them was considered more stringent and the other one was considered more liberal. Where would Rashi fall in that spectrum? Is that even a good question? I mean, was he a lenient kind of guy?
So would he be lenient like Hillel or stringent like Shammai? I don't see. The problem with the question is that Rashi, although he did write some responsa, he is primarily a commentator and not an authority on halakha.
Oh.
And so, I mean, he was a halakhic authority, as he did write responsa, but that's not the role he's playing here. He's trying to tease out what he thinks is the most reasonable solution to a problem in the text. The problem in the text, obvious, where God is talking to the whole people, and yet it's said in the singular.
Okay.
So that's, I suppose you could come up with an answer that would be halakhically more stringent. But that doesn't seem to be Rashi's methodology. Rashi's just, he looks at the verses, he sees the questions, which, by the way, the Midrashic commentators, obviously, they also saw the questions. But they felt more free to improvise, even if something wasn't, totally rational. Rashi prefers that which is rational, rather than making up something that is, a sermonic kind of answer.
He's very big on grammar and vocabulary, and
oh yes,
where is this used elsewhere in the Torah?
And so this is an answer that plays into what happens in the text later on. it is consistent with, at least in Rashi's, in the Midrashic creative mind, might have happened after the golden calf. And that's why Rashi is more willing to turn to this. Okay, moving along. Okay, so here's the answer of the French commentator Ghizkuni. He says, just as an image can be made so that everyone thinks the eyes are looking directly at him, so too when God spoke, everyone thought he was talking directly to him. After all, if the taste of manna could have the taste best liked by every individual, how much more so God's word? The part about the manna is also a very popular midrash, that the manna tasted good for everyone.
I thought that
It
was in the
tasted
Torah,
like,
no?
I'm sorry?
I thought that was in the Torah.
Yeah, so,
And
but
it says it would taste like whatever you wanted it to.
You-
No?
not exactly, I don't think that's the exact way that it puts it, but it seems to suggest that it tastes differently for different people. So if, chocolate cream pie is what you crave, that's what the manna would taste like.
Oh, that sounds good.
And
Yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
were in the mood for roast beef one day and chocolate cream pie another day,
yeah,
would it
have to be at
vary?
least 6 hours afterwards, but sure, yeah, yeah. But yeah, so if the manna could be like that, so, everyone might also feel, just as the manna was personalized, so is God's word directed specifically to them.
How is that different from the Protestant idea that any person could read the scriptures and whatever it means to him, he's right?
I don't think it says that your interpretation is right. This simply says you felt as if God was speaking directly to you. Now, if you're a confused individual, you'll probably have a confused interpretation of the Torah. But that doesn't change the fact that you're legitimately hearing God speaking as if it were directly to you. Okay.
I've never heard of this guy before. Maybe I just haven't been paying attention, but I like him. I've never heard.
Yeah, he's, there's a lot of books with commentaries that he's not in. Sorry.
How do you say his name?
Ghizkuni.
Ghizkuni.
That's really the name of his commentary. His name is Hezekiah ben Manoach. So
What does his kuni mean?
Ghizkuni strengthen me.
Okay, when you pronounced his name, I wasn't reading carefully. That sounds familiar. I was thinking Ghizkuni was his name. So, yeah.
Everybody calls him Ghizkuni.
But I seriously, I like him.
So look him up
to mana
so look
and
him
whatever.
up on the internet, and you'll get to know him. I don't think his commentary has been translated into English, but bits and pieces of it are, here and there. If you Google Ghizkuni and Yitro, for instance, you'll probably find I'm sure he's not been translated on Sepharia, but bits and pieces you can find. Okay.
He's got a Wikipedia article.
Oh, well, a lot of lesser figures than Ghizkuni have your Wikipedia articles. It's not a guarantee of greatness. Okay, next piece, and this is also about how God, since we talked about how God was heard, how did God appear? So this midrash says, God appeared to them at the sea as a warrior. God appeared to them at Sinai as a scribe teaching Torah. Remember, we were all told that you couldn't see God. Sorry, scratch that idea. Midrash says God appeared to them in the time of Solomon as a youth, and God appeared to them in the time of Daniel as an elder. The Holy Blessed One said to them, they see me in many forms. It is I who was at the sea, I who was at Sinai, I who am the Lord your God. You know, when I first learned this midrash, I thought to myself, that can't be right. That can't be a Jewish approach. You can't see God. And they said, well, but they did. Yeah. Yes, Ann.
At the sea, even the maidservants, whatever that means, saw more than any of the prophets.
Yeah, so there is the midrash. We're coming to that, actually.
Sorry.
If you look down about a dozen lines or so, it says, at the sea, even the maidservant saw that which the prophet Ezekiel did not see. Ezekiel being like having the most intense mystical experiences of any of the prophets, right?
Rabbi?
Ronnie, are you holding up your hand because you want me to call on you or because you don't want to see?
Yes, no, the former. I thought the only one who ever saw God was Moshe and only saw his back.
I know, I mean, it just, I looked at this and I said,
This
that
is
can't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is a midrash.
Yes, it is.
I find it hard to.
But usually the midrashim are not this heretical.
Yeah.
Okay. So here's the problem, Ronnie. The problem is you and I were raised in the 20th century.
Correct.
And we went to a religious school and we were told that you can't see God.
Correct.
God is totally spiritual.
Correct.
But in the Bible, they didn't know that.
So they were able to see him because they didn't know they couldn't.
Right. Yes, Nick.
Well, maybe they thought they saw him, or they're alluding to that because of all the paganism that surrounded them. And also, I thought the first of the 13 principles of Judaism was that God is not corporal, that he doesn't have a body, and he's not affected by any physical form and stuff like that.
Okay. So, when you look at Maimonides' 13 principles, it's very pristine in that way, right? Because Maimonides was extremely rational. In fact, he believed that if you thought that God had corporeal form, you would be excluded from the world to come. It was that bad, right? You could be the most righteous person around, but if you believe in the wrong thing, man, you're out of luck.
That's a pretty high standard.
That's a really tough standard. That's how rationalistic Maimonides was. So all these other people who weren't so rationalistic, who actually believed that they could see God, you can't write them out of Judaism so easily. Yes, Ann.
We're accustomed to saying that when it says God has a hand, that they're being metaphorical and comparing God to a human. But Rabbi Manis Friedman says, no, God is the one who has the real hands. We're the ones who have the imitation hands.
Yeah, and by the way, Kabbalah says something to that effect. We just have these forms that come into physical being, but on a non-physical level, those forms are all part of what's called Adam Kadmon, the original form of a human being, which is really just, one of God's direct creations, but it's also based on a higher form. In Kabbalah, you have all these different emanations, the 10 Sfirot, where, things gradually filter down into this world. But it's like concentrated orange juice. This is what my teacher, Dr. Yeshurun, Olav Shalom, used to say, that, concentrated orange juice, you can't drink it, right?
You can eat it.
But if you water it down, then it becomes palatable and even very tasty, right? So the same thing with God. Our understanding of God, by necessity, has to be watered down. Our perception of God has to be watered down. And that works. All right, moving right along. Another piece from Rashi based on the Midrash says, I do change appearances. In other words, Rashi acknowledges that God has an appearance, actually has more than one. But do not err and say that there are two divine powers. I am the one who took you out of Egypt. I am the one who was at the sea. In other words, I'm still one God, even though I may appear to you in different ways. Okay? Next. Okay? So first, the original source for this rabbinic teaching, at the sea, he appeared to them as a youth. At Sinai, he appeared to them as an elder. The Blessed Holy One constricts himself in the worlds. However, at the sea, where there was a change in nature, he was not garbed in the worlds. And the Israelites saw the divine unclothed. And it was just like unfiltered. Okay? At Sinai, however, the Blessed Holy One dressed himself such that the worlds could maintain their existence. In the writings of Luria, the Ari, clothing is associated with the symbol of hair. That is why at the sea, God appeared to them as a youth without a beard, right? Without any worldly garb. When giving the Torah, God was revealed to them as an elder with a beard. By the way, in Hebrew, the word for elder and the word for beard are very much the same as zaken, and zaken. So, the elder always has a beard in Hebrew. This is alluded to in the words of our sages of blessed memory, and there's the piece about the maidservant. For Ezekiel and the other prophets saw God clothed in the world, as it were, according to the measure of the worlds. But at the sea, everyone saw God unclothed. They don't mean they saw God naked, but unfiltered, unmediated. At Sinai, however, God had to be covered in garments, right, so that the Israelites would understand the Torah. And that is why it is written in the Rosh Hashanah liturgy, you appeared in the cloud of your glory. As by limiting and clothing his great light, inside a cloud is darkness, the liturgy then explains why it was necessary, saying, you appeared, in the cloud upon your holy people to speak to them, meaning God spoke to them from within a cloud, a garment, so that they could understand it, right? And so that teaching is the teaching from the aforementioned Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Right? Questions or comments up to here? Okay. So I want to skip to the next to last teaching, um, just and maybe squeezing these last two, right? So why does it say God who brought you out of the land of Egypt? You know, and they didn't know where they came from. They came out 7 weeks before. They knew they came from Egypt. Why does it mention that? Right? So Ibn Ezra says, Yehuda Levi asked me this question, you know what? Why did God say that instead of saying who created heaven and earth and who created you? And I said, well, you know, I, the Lord, is enough if you're really, if you're really savvy. But the average person needed tangible proof of why they should serve God. And that's why it mentions who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Because if if you ask God, what have you done for me? God can tell you, right? God can tell you, I took you out of Egypt. Something that we remember countless times every day in the prayers, right? If you say all 3 prayer services, if you do every word in the service, you're going to mention the Exodus many, many times. Okay. Last piece. So here's the question. Why does it need to say, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out from the house of bondage? Why does it need to say from the house of bondage? Did they not know that Egypt was the house of bondage, was a place of slavery? Of course they did. But this is from Dennis Prager, who knows his Bible very well. God knew that they had short memories. They needed this reminder that the Egypt from which they had escaped was actually hell on earth. And Egypt was the first Holocaust inflicted upon the Jewish people. Okay? That makes sense to me. Because if you're going to say that this phrase has some significance, I think his answer is a good answer. Because we know that the Israelites, forget very quickly. And how many times do they say, let's turn around, let's go back. We came here to die in the desert. That was prophetic too, by the way, but because they did die in the desert, that generation. Yes, Del.
Both of these are not for that generation as such. It's for the generations that followed, starting with their children and coming through us.
Well, that's another good way to look at it too. God is not just talking to the Israelites who came out of Egypt. People today, when they talk about ancient Egypt, they think of, the great creations. They think of mathematics and, advanced civilization for its time. But that's not how Jews think about Egypt. I mean, we're not talking about modern Egypt, obviously. They have their own problems. But modern Jews, we have been trained to think that Egypt was the house of bondage. And all those other things were secondary to the cruelty that was imposed upon the slaves. Yes, Daniel.
For what it's worth, when I read that full sentence, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, that was a thing he did. Then, and who brought you out of mental, psychological bondage. In other words, the way you can think going forward will be as liberating as the physical bondage, the physical presence that you had in Egypt. It's 2 different ideas. as
That is a
how
nice-
God is bringing in liberty.
Yeah, that's a nice vort, Daniel.
But it's wrong.
It's a nice explanation of the verse. My only concern about it would be that it didn't really apply for most of the slaves themselves. It would have to apply for the future generations, because those slaves, that's the reason they had to die in the desert, because they couldn't shed the slave mentality. Okay, it's 8:30. Thank you very much, everybody. Good to see you. Shabbat Shalom. Ashley, thank you for holding down the fort.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and thank you very much, Rabbi. This has been a
All
great
right.
class.
All righty.
Thank
All
you.
right, we'll see you at Sinai,
Thank you
everybody.
all.